Hey, everybody. Today's episode, Andres Klaric. Interesting dude talking about business and technology. And then I was choking up there at the end as he talked about some of the other stuff. What do you think, Maurice?
Yeah, I really like it. He's very different from everything else that we've seen so far.
Yeah.
Not a lot of zigzagging as far as career is concerned, but he had to do a major pivot with his business, which I think is very interesting. He talked a lot about, and you're going to see some of the red lines that we talk about all the time, right? Or that comes up all the time. You will recognize some of those red lines. And actually, when the camera was off, he talked about that he did some stand-up comedy. That's unfortunate that we didn't get to that, but hey,
next episode, there we go. I have to have him back.
That's the next episode with him, and that's the guy that you have, right? That's Andres Klaric for you, and yeah, keep watching. It's super interesting. All right, dear guys, let's get it started then, right?
Because really, what could go wrong once you press record? Right?
Exactly, what could go wrong? It's all going to be very perfect.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Crazy People Doing a Podcast, or the Crazy People Podcast, whichever you want to call it. In chair number 3, I am Russ Brummel over here. Over there in chair number 1, the captain of curiosity, Maurice Hoffman. And today with us, our honored guest, Andres Klaric. Try to get all the accents and stuff in there. Welcome, Andres.
Hey, Russ. Hi, Maurice. Thank you for having me here.
It's absolutely our pleasure. Where are you based out of?
I'm based out of New York right now. This is just the background. I'm not in space or something. That our office is close to Times Square or Bryant Park, depending on how sophisticated you want to sound.
Perfect. As I said in the intro, until a few years ago, I was based out of New York Metro, which is fancy for New Jersey. There's a town called West New York, New Jersey, and that's a lot of fun if you bring that up in New York. They're like, "What are you? Are you New York or New Jersey?" No, that's the name of the town. It's West New York, New Jersey. No, that's not possible. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I claim to be a New Yorker too, but I spent 25 years out on Long Island, and you ask anybody from New York City, they're like, "Nah, that doesn't count. It's completely a whole other world out there. Forget
it." Fantastic. Great to have you on. I already see in your background from the Fuse. So tell me, let me jump right in. What does Fuse do?
Fuse is a loan origination system. So what we do is facilitate loans, right? Is the technology layer that banks, finance companies, credit unions, community banks use in order for a loan to be originated, right? So whenever you apply for a loan, that entire workflow is designed in a piece of technology. That piece of technology orchestrates a bunch of API calls. For example, run your credit, check for fraud, verify income, verify employment, and all those sorts of kind of verifications. What our tool does is orchestrate all of that, right? I mean, we work with hundreds of vendors, and that enables us to kind of for banks or any other type of lenders working with us to do it so in the fastest way possible.
That sounds super complicated, but yet interesting.
It is complicated indeed. It is the type of product that takes a lot of coordination, and you need very good engineers to put that together in order to simplify it and make it possible for folks to do so in a way that is not mind-bending, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay. How do you get around to founding something like that? I've seen, and I looked at your LinkedIn page, like people do these days, and I see that you have an investment background. And from what the one red line that we have with all the founders that we talk to, they saw a mess in their job, and then decided to solve that mess, right? And solve the problem, whatever they were confronted with, and then create a company out of that. Is that the same for you?
It was similar. We actually started as a direct to consumer brand, so we were problem solving for that more like mass market problem that was access to credit, right? So that vein, we started there. When we realized there was not only like just access to credit that was the issue, when you just double click it and you see the architecture and kind of the infrastructure in which lenders are built, you realize that the issue it's not them being slow, it's like them being slow by the technological tech stacks that are old and antiquated and they need a very big lift, right? So I if anything, out of luck, we kind of we started direct to consumer, we moved into direct B2B. But had we not started that original direct to consumer, we would have not had the insights of having that unique, what I would consider customer empathy, because we were the first customer of the product we built. As we built the product, our lenders approached us and they were like, instead of selling us loans, why don't you sell us technology? So having that kind of realization as an organization that, hey, what the market wants is beyond our loans, is they actually want our technology. So we were pretty proud that like actually we had already built that, so we needed to productize it in such a way that we could actually go to market as an enterprise software company versus just a direct to consumer brand.
Yeah, that has to be a pivot, because
it is a pivot.
Because if you go to consumers and then you change to B2B, that, I mean, essentially everything has to change in how you look at your business, right? Because the marketing has to be different, your target audience has to be different, your entire presentation of who you are and what you do has to pivot, right? How did you manage that?
It is a realization that, at least as a founding team, you have to have a very honest conversation. Kind of what I always kind of call with my co-founder, you need to fall in love again with your co-founders. It's kind of like renewing the vows, so to speak, in which the two of us kind of realize, hey, like we do have a much better opportunity in the enterprise SaaS market. That will mean that, like, to some extent, the composition of the team will have to change. The go-to-market motion will have to change. The brand will have to change, and we will have to have a multiple times of what we had in terms of conviction that like that new market was there. Where we were lucky is that we had raised plenty of capital, so like we had a lot of gas in the tank to go in the near direction, and we were able to sign new customers that validated that level of conviction that we had. I would say that what you need to do in these situations is keep everyone informed, your investors, your employees, as many stakeholders as you have, to not create any conflict in such a way that you ensure success of that transition. But a pivot is not easy. I mean, it's in our case, we were lucky that was kind of the pool of our customers, so to speak. But I mean, it's still something that needs to be orchestrated quite well and executed even better than what you were doing before, because all the things you mentioned, right? There's just so many stakeholders that need to be kind of kept in the loop.
Yeah. Did you have at that time when you made the pivot, did you already have consumer customers?
Oh yeah, we were doing like a bunch of loans every month, right? So
yeah,
what we did is like we still kept that website up just to like continue getting traffic and apply any learnings that we could do. But of course, with time, like that, at some point you just stop taking applications, right? But in terms of like finalizing and making sure that every single customer that had gone through that process kind of was fulfilled and all our contractual obligations were fulfilled, we did all of that, right? Like it was a very well, like before and after, and making sure that we were not leaving anyone dissatisfied to post pivot, right? Like as I mentioned, just over communicate in such a way that there are no surprises.
Nice, interesting. Something else that you said, and that is something that is Russ had to smile when you said it, because it's becoming a red line for a lot of the founders and for the themes that we have, that you said, and you phrased it so nicely, that you said you had to fall in love again with your co-founders, right? I think it's a perfect summary of what the relationship with your co-founders has to be, right? In a platonic way, obviously, but joking aside, I mean that because you spend so much time with them, and you have to find a basis that is so honest with them that it has to be comparable to almost to a romantic relationship, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the person you spend the most time in your life with. Like, it is like not even you definitely don't spend as much time with your parents. You do not spend as much time even with your loved ones, right? So that having a very high base level of honesty and kind of being able to have conversations that are productive and professional is very important. I think that I had the fortune of meeting my co-founder in the context of business school, but I would say I also have the fortune that like we have the base level is like a very professional relationship of trust, and that goes before anything, right? Like there's nothing gets in the way. It's not that like there's love, that there's like a friendship. The most important thing is that we have this professional bond in common, and that is kind of like of the highest. It has set the standard of how everything else is conducted, right? And that falling in love is also kind of along the lines of like, if I ever did this again, meaning to go the venture route, it will most likely just be with that person, right? Like, because there is just so much trust that is built, and it's just so exciting to just put together this organization. Of course, it's not only us, right? It's the support of our families, the support of investors, and most importantly, like the employees that trust us and work with us at such an early stage, right?
Yeah, I totally get that. So you founded in 2020, correct?
Yeah, the legal entity was founded in 2020. Like but we started kind of really operating 2 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
And there was nothing going on in the world as you're trying to start a company in that kind of situation, especially in New York. It was just like there's nothing happening, right? So.
Yeah, easy going. Nothing special.
Yeah, it was very fertile ground though. There was just so much stuff going on that everyone was kind of challenging what the base level of everything was, right? Like what is e-commerce is going to look like, how much of how would the economy behave, like how much would it go into e-contracting, how we would even think about cars, right? Like there was just a shortage in production, then like a peak in demand. People were talking about like just so many things, and so for us, if anything, it was probably one of the most unique times to kind of like challenge those notions, and I guess like for a while, life is fragile, right? But like it felt increasingly fragile during that period of time. So I think we all felt as an entire global community that, hey, we want to make the best out of the time we have here. So what type of impact do you want to have as a professional, as a family member, as a friend? And I think for me, like at least at a professional level, it was a very, very unique time in that. And aside from all the, of course, the human tragedy and pain that it brought, I think I remember it as a very unique opportunity to really reconsider and kind of change the direction of my career.
That Russ, does that sound like something familiar to you? Reconsider and change direction, because that is exactly the time where I moved to Germany in September that year. And shortly after, I left the company that Russ and I worked in together. So I totally get when you're saying that. But the other side, and that is just on a company level, right? The other side, since 2020 and everything that was going on there, 2020, 2021, a lot more has happened in New York, right? There's a huge price spike, right?
Yes.
People out of Manhattan, now they're moving back into Manhattan, at least those that can afford it. And there's a lot of things going on where it seems like so many things in the city are shifting. How did you manage that with your staff, right? How did you manage them and allow them to go through these phases?
Yeah. I mean, we were originally born as a fully remote business, right? So like the pandemic kind of enabled us to do so. As an entrepreneur, the nice thing about moving into New York during the pandemic is that you could actually lock very, very affordable rates. So you could actually bootstrap the early days of the kind of research and validation of the business. So that in a way, like I kind of reduce to the maximum my own spend in such a way that I could actually allocate resources on a tactical basis to what the business was. To some extent, that philosophy of where our employees work from, it kind of remains the same. We have an hybrid structure. We have some folks in the U.S., some folks overseas, and we try to organize once or twice kind of get-togethers, regional or like global get-togethers in such a way that the relationships go beyond the rectangular square, so to speak. But yeah, New York has changed a lot. I mean, I've been on and off New York for the last 12 years, and this, at least on the residential side, definitely prices are back to normal, if not higher. But when you think about commercial real estate, right, like you just see some of these towers just looking around here out of the window, there are so many empty buildings, right? So it just goes to show that in certain categories, folks are just not going back to the office yet, even in one of the largest metropolis in the world.
Yeah, it's almost like as if employees kind of have proven that working from home works. And now there's no way that you're getting them back, right? It's like, no. Yeah. You can't tell me anything anymore. It works. Be quiet now.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, it's one of those I think that we're going to go back to some kind of middle of the road. We'll see what happens from if there's how big of if the soft landing path that like in theory we're in materializes, and like the tightening of the job market kind of discontinues. There's a little more loosening there. I imagine there will be a little bit of more going back to work, but the 5-day work week, the way that we were most of our careers have been, I think it's safe to say that like it's almost ceased to exist in its original form.
Yeah.
I moved out of New York in 2001, but there was plenty of people that came from where I lived out on Long Island, which was an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes from Manhattan by train. And they'd ride the train in every morning, work all day, ride the train home every night, 5 days a week. And that was what they had done. That's what their parents had done. And they was like, this is how life is. And then for 2 years, everybody sat home and they're like, maybe this isn't how life is anymore. Hang on a second. Right. So, But you're right, Andres, is that, and we've talked with other people who run really kind of remote or sort of hybrid remote companies, and the ability to hire people where they are for the talent that you're looking for and the personality and the approach that you're looking for is huge. New York is maybe one of the biggest talent pools in the whole world, right? If you need to find somebody, you can find them in New York, but maybe they're out on Long Island, or they're upstate, or they're in Connecticut, or they're in West New York, New Jersey, in Maurice's old place, right? And so they could be anywhere, and they could have that hour and a half commute in or whatever, right? So being able to just get to work and get at it remotely, whether they're in Europe or Asia or California, New York, or wherever they are, it's really solid. How have you though kept up with the the culture side of it? Because you mentioned earlier, like trust is central to everything you do. How do you build that same kind of trust far away?
I think that it's not easy, right? Like there's no one solution for everything, but I think that communicating to the team what the set of goals are, like kind of keeping up to date. They miss all the water cooler conversations. They don't exist, right? Or it's very hard to kind of recreate those moments on a remote culture. So I think it's to the extent possible is verbalizing to them what's happening, right? Like the customer wins. How do you actually show to them like the business is getting the traction that they see, right? So they don't work in a vacuum in which the work feels like pointless, right? It shouldn't be that way. So it's my co-founder and my role to really get them excited, keep them posted, keep them that peace of mind that leadership is laser focused and keeping the lights on, right? And keep them doing exciting and engaging work is fundamental. We do, like, to be more specific, we do like happy hours and activities, like in order to kind of tell me about yourself and like kind of put people on the spot in a cute way to like for them to like to share things that are outside of work, talk about music, Slack channels just for music, things like that like just seem minor, but I think to create little by little culture. But I do think that like even at this stage, any leader that it has remote business will tell you that culture is like it's a everyday thought, but it's not like set of science. What's the best way to keep engaged? I think that people like the freedom, but I would say for junior employees, to some extent, it's probably arguably better to like be perhaps in an office, right? Because they're like starting early. Whereas for individual senior contributors, having them remotely is probably what they would like in many instances. It just finding that middle and trying to see what that secret sauce is for your organization, the type of product are you building, and the client base that you're serving.
Yeah. I see Maurice's ears perking up talking about young employees and new folks developing.
Yeah, yeah, that's because that's exactly what my team is like, right? And my team is spread out between a northern city in Germany, about 120 miles from here, and then another one is in Barcelona, which is an hour and a half, 2 hours flight from here, which is not a lot by American standards, but for Europe, it's ridiculous, right?
I can't even get out of my state in an hour and a half. Come on.
I know. I've been there. As you know, I've seen 42 states, so I know exactly. But Andres, I want to pivot a little bit because I'm looking at your name, and it's not the most straightforward name there is, right? It looks like a culture clash just in your name. So give us a bit of your origin story, your background.
Yeah, so I have a Croatian background from my dad's side and from my mom's side, where Bolivian, Chilean, so to speak. That's kind of our background, right? I mean, I was born in Tennessee, though. I was born in Chattanooga, but based on my accent, I always joke that it's a Southern Hemisphere accent, not a Southern state type of accent.
Sounds like a Tennessee accent to me, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
I had the fortune, I had the fortune of being born in America. So I grew up in Bolivia, kind of knowing that one day I will come back here, and that's in a way, like by now I've been, aside from being born here, I've been 16, 17 years back in the US. My adult life has been in America, right? I haven't been able to get rid of my accent, but all my adult memories, the entirety of my professional career, and in all likelihood, like a good chunk of the time I have left on Earth is going to be spent in America, right? I think that now when I go back to Bolivia, it's like when you play an old video game, the graphics, for them, it's probably the way they experience me. It's like, wow, this guy struck in '06. So like a time machine for them, for me to just see that's kind of like what I remember and what I used to experience being there.
While we're at your origin story, tell us how did it happen? How did you go to school? What were your interests? How did you end up in finance?
Yeah,
To get to your spot where you're at now.
absolutely. So grew up in Bolivia. I moved to the US a little bit before undergrad started. At that point, I got a job at a car dealership in Northern Virginia. In essence, that was like the first of 2 or 3 summers that I was there. I helped my parents pay for college selling cars. Selling cars was just probably one of the most formative experiences of my life, because you deal with so much rejection, right? Like out of the gates, you're an 18-year-old, and the perception that people generally have of salespeople, and particularly people in car sales, it's not necessarily positive, right? Like it's neutral at best, and for some people. So having that experience and being able to convince someone within a span of, like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 hours to spend $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 in you, because at the end of the day, a car is a car, right? But like you being able to convince them that they should get the car from you versus any other person, that in itself was a great experience. I'm very grateful that I had it, and I would highly recommend anyone to get those type of experiences early on, because it's just, rejection is a powerful tool and the sooner you face it, the better. It's going to help in everything. You're going to trip so many times in your life that you might as well just trip pretty fast and make mistakes soon. And that was that. Then I went to undergrad. I graduated from Penn in Philadelphia, and then I went to Wall Street for 10 years. I was an investor. I started as an investment banker, then I switched into investing in tech and business services. So in a way, I was intimately familiar with the type of business that I'm running today, but from the investor perspective, right? So I kind of knew how scalable this type of businesses are, the margins, the problems, and kind of what makes them attractive to investors, and like what makes them attractive to founders leading them. Went to Harvard for my MBA. That's how I met my co-founder 8 years ago. And that's kind of like the short story. I'm happy to double click on any of those.
Yeah. That's a funny way of saying it. So how was Harvard like? Because even though I lived in the US for 10 years, Harvard is like the big university, right? The big thing of dreams and whatever that you hear of. So how was it like?
I mean, I do agree that, like, for me it was a dream too, right? Like it's something that you put as a North Star, and when it happens, it's a combination of luck, right? It's there are so many other very talented people that apply, and I think like the imposter syndrome hits everyone, if not, well, not everyone, but I'm sure a good chunk of the people attending. I comparatively to my initial undergrad experience, I was able to have them to be a little bit more mature and kind of make the best out of that opportunity, right? So from day one, I took full advantage of being a student and trying to make the best out of the network. You cannot do everything, right? Like you're not going to be able to hang out with every person that goes there or take all the classes. But for me, something that I wanted to do is like to speak people that get to know folks that were a little bit older than me, that were later in their career. So what I did is I put as an objective to kind of have conversations every week with someone interesting of the alumni network, right? Like someone that works at SpaceX, a PhD in one field, or like someone that works in certain investment funds. And like I did that in 2 years. Like when you think about like 52, 53 weeks a year, you end up speaking with like over 100 people, if not more, that otherwise you wouldn't have the opportunity to just cold outreach through LinkedIn, right? Like being able to say, hey, I'm a student here getting the MBA. I want to have a conversation. That it'd be great. I mean, there's good and bad of things that could happen like when you go there. But in general, I think it's a transformative experience if you want to make it transformative.
That is a very interesting approach to utilize that network. The last time I've heard something like that is when I heard, actually, I think it was a Penn or when Magic Johnson spoke there. And he talked about how when he started with the Lakers back then, and Dr. Buss kind of became the late Dr. Buss kind of became his adopted father, the owner of the LA Lakers, the NBA basketball team. And what Magic did is he asked Dr. Buss to introduce him to everyone that had floor seats and kind of get into contact with them and see how they made it. Right? Which seems a similar strategy, right? You're really utilizing the reach and the context that are available to you to really get their knowledge and to really get their side of their share, get a share of their experiences. I find that fascinating. How did they react when you reach out to them?
The vast majority took the call. Like it's and you have like those. Yeah, I would say like 90, if not 95% of folks that you reach out to will set a meeting with you, and you will speak with CEOs, head of investment funds. That's the beauty about that network, right? It's in that sense of like paying it forward it's amazing. I think if I try to do it now, I haven't tried it much as an alum, but I do think that at that point people have very low defenses when it comes to like a current student. So to the extent that like the student base of listeners, they don't have to be at Harvard either to do this. Like they're amazing alumni everywhere in every school, and their emails are right there, right? Just go into that database and reach out to them. And even for folks that haven't gone to university, like there's LinkedIn, there's many other channels, and I'm sure that if you insist enough, someone will like pick up and try to really talk to you and give you like, sure. In general, it's not that they feel that they made it either. I haven't met that many people that felt that they made it. I think that they still think that they're work in progresses. Yeah. And they will be more than happy to at least share some of the decision criteria that they follow, like some frameworks they might have utilized.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea though, because we all have, so to speak, a tool chest, right? And we can have like one relationship in it, or we could have 100. And it's just being intentional about saying, hey, let's go meet some people. Let's go see what they're doing. And maybe I'll learn a little something from them, and maybe they'll learn a little something from me. And, we'll share something, and then we'll see. Maybe there's something to do down the road that I go, oh yeah, I met this person, 6 months ago, and they can help this other person, or I can make a connection or something, right? Something in the business, whatever it is. That's a very cool way for that's a mature way, I think you said, right? For a young man to think. That's cool.
What is one of the best stories that you heard, and what is one of the craziest stories that you heard?
Yeah.
We have to be on brand here. There has to be something crazy there.
I mean, without giving names, but I had the but I had the opportunity once to run into like someone that was like a chairman of a board of like like Fortune 500 company. But this was not in the context of like sending an email, but I was at a hotel and I was just having a beer. This was in Athens, and this person was sitting right next to me, and we started chatting, and I kind of mentioned at first the conversation was not necessarily going anywhere, just the surface level. And at some point I did mention that I had gone to HBS, right? And at that point the person was, oh, I'm also a class of like sometime in the 60s or 70s. And the conversation went from like, oh, the Acropolis looks nice, to like, hey, my family's not here. Do you want to have dinner? Or so we ended up having dinner with the person. Told me a bunch of stories of boards that he had been into, like, and talked to me about his like car collection and things like that. In essence, he had lived a life that very few. So I was able to kind of ask him about just his perspective on a couple of like big top 10 leaders right now. Talk about politicians, and it was just great to see like how normal you tend to kind of create a myth around these people, and they're just like everyone else, right? Of course, like they've amassed an incredible amount of economic and just clout and every things like that. But to me, it felt like as if I was just hanging out with my grandfather. It didn't feel like it just felt like, oh, my grandfather had this experiences, this other grandfather had this experiences, and I that was kind of like on the kind of fascinating. I remember coming out and just calling my dad and mom and be like, "You're not gonna believe what the last 4 or 5 hours have been. I just learned so much. Just cool idea." But you have like things like that you sometimes you will speak with people that are investors and like or people work in science, and they would all have like some set of priorities and scales on how they really measure their lives, right? And yeah, that's I don't know if I fully answered the question, but that's kind of like something like
that. That's perfect. That's perfect. It's the funny thing is that's something that I've learned, and I used to work in music industry for a while. That and I met really very prominent musicians, and I met people that nobody have ever heard of and probably never will. And what I found out that those that really are globally known have nothing to prove. They are so next door, other than obviously their lifestyle, right? But from a personality perspective and their professionalism, they are so as next door as you ever could be, right? Because they don't have anything to prove. They know who they are. They know what they've achieved. They don't have to pretend anything, right? They're just relaxed, right? Leaning back, relaxed. So I can relate to that part where like, wow, this is crazy. That is that person, and he does it. I remember a little story, and because it's so out there. I remember having done an interview with Ice-T and then walking the streets with him. And back then we were like, my partner and I, we were like 20, 21. Right? We were just working at a local TV station and walking the street with Ice-T, which was our hero back then, sometime in the 90s. And so we were talking, and it was just like talking to a dad or to an uncle, until he walked by some kind of Ferrari. He was like, "Oh, that's the one I just ordered." And then suddenly this gap was back there again, right? Because I struggled to have my Mark I Golf and keep that going, right? And he talked about one of the Ferraris that he just owned. And then suddenly the gap popped up again, right? And it's funny that way, If you were to meet your 16-year-old self, probably still living in Bolivia at that time, right?
Yeah.
What would you tell him? What advice would you give him?
I think if anything, at that stage, I did have like very high expectations of what I wanted to be like. Of course, what I would say is just enjoy that moment, in the sense that like life is gonna pass very fast, right? And just stay for. I wouldn't say lack of focus was not ever an issue, like, but I would definitely tell that young self also enjoy that process, right? Like don't. I think when life feels pretty linear at that stage in terms of like that checklist, I would say up until your late 20s, right? It at least the way that I imagine my life was very linear. It was undergrad, then like 3 to 4 years of a job, then going to business school for 2 years. So that at that point, you have your first 27, 28 years of your life figured out, right? Like, and same if you're going to either like med school, law school, if you kind of go those routes of like college education and post grad or grad school education, it just feels like pretty predictable. What you forget is that how many other things are moving variables in life, right? And I think that you lack that perspective as a young person, and in terms of like, hey, like, you also, this is going to be a very enjoyable process, and like, you're not going to get back any of these years, right? So in college, just get to meet all these interesting people, take advantage of the classes. Maybe don't focus that much on like, I mean, I always say like, don't try to be a double or triple major and just 5 minors, right? Like, just do one major that is highly applicable in the job market that you have, and then like just try to pick up as many interesting classes, right? I wish I would have taken a little more philosophy classes instead of taking more some of the classes that filled kind of my ambition of getting multiple majors, right?
Yeah.
That I would say, and nurture, keep nurturing relationships with family, right? Like I would I think it as time passes, and there's that article, right? Like, by the time you're 18, I think you live like 90 to 95% of the time left, or you spend like some high 90% of time with your parents. Just be very conscious about that, or especially if you're a 16-year-old, right? Like, you're at that tail end of that chunk of time that you have left with your parents and siblings. Just really treasure that. There's gonna be time for friends. There's gonna be time for love. There's gonna be time for profession. Like, it really is the last period of your time at home, right? So eat as much of that home cooked food, and remind your parents that you love them, because the energy that they give you, it's gonna be like that rocket ship into many things, right? Like, parents are that inalienable source of love and self-belief. I mean, they believe in you before you ever believed in anything, right? Like, I cannot think of, they're like the rocket fuel. I would never attribute any of my successes to just myself. We're all the sum of efforts, and they are. I would attribute the majority of it to their unconditional love and the sacrifices that they make. So those, like, 16-year-old, like, don't be that tough with your parents.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I definitely will keep that little plaidoyer there and save it for when my son is at that age.
Play it back. Here, listen to this.
Play it back. Hey, listen. Listen to this guy. Fantastic, Andres. I really enjoyed our time. I think it was highly informative and so different from everything else that we've heard so far in our expansive time as podcast host.
Just dozen of episodes. You know? One last thing before we go, Andres. Tell Maurice the little short story of how you're connected to the Crazy People podcast.
Oh yeah, so my girlfriend's former roommate is Eleanor, and I think he spoke with Helena, and I saw that you had spoken with them, and I thought, hey, like, if they enjoy that conversation, I think I should definitely reach out to them, and that's that. I even mentioned my girlfriend, hey, do you think I can just reach out to them? Do you think it'd be fine? And that's kind of the story. My girlfriend, who's the Norwegian, that I actually attribute I put all the responsibility on the legal entity of Fuse being called what it's called. It's one of the best friends of one of your former interviewees. So that's kind of the origin story of that. And I reached out to Russ, and the rest is history.
See, there you go.
Fantastic. I didn't know about that. That's fantastic.
It's a small, crazy world. There you go.
Yeah. Small, crazy world. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, your story with us. I'm pretty sure the audience had a blast watching this. And people, come back. click back on for the Crazy People podcast and meet more interesting people like Andres just here. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.